Okay, Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Wa usalli wa usallimu ala man ba'itha rahmatan lil alameen wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. In the name of Allah, the compassionate, the merciful, and I send peace and prayers upon the one who is sent as a mercy to all mankind. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah, everyone, and welcome to this month's session and the final session of 2022, 2023 of the Ummatics Colloquium. And it gives me great pleasure. My name is Usama Al-A'zami. I am the sort of moderator of the Ummatics Colloquium, and it gives me immense pleasure to welcome Dr. Riham Khafagy, who's joining us from Zayed University in the United Arab Emirates. And inshallah, she'll be introducing us to the concept of Waqf and its importance in an ummatic context. Inshallah, we'll be welcoming her to speak for about 40 minutes. Members of the audience, we welcome you to type in questions in the Q&A, and we will inshallah address this hopefully in about 40, straight afterwards, after the presentation, inshallah. So with respect to the question of Waqf, civil society organizations have played a key role in Islamic political history, vis-à-vis the central ruling authority throughout this history, providing essential services to the public and sometimes acting to check and balance power. However, with the establishment and expansion of the modern nation state, the role of civil society in the Muslim world, especially the role of Islamic endowments or Awqaf, has significantly shrunk and mostly have come under the control of the modern nation state. In this context, it's extremely important for us to reflect on both the historical role of Awqaf as an institution within Islamic societies, but at the same time to think about how they can be meaningfully revived and develop a kind of independence in modern institutions. As I was reflecting with Dr. Riham briefly before we started the broadcast, this is one of the areas in which the role of Awqaf has become extremely significant in places like the United States, where you have these massive foundations, and other Western nations as well. But the United States is perhaps the world's leader in educational Awqaf. And I look forward to hearing Dr. Riham's sort of perspectives on these questions. Dr. Riham Khafagy is assistant professor at the College of Humanities and Social Sciences at Zayed University, and she will inshallah help us unpack the tension between the nation state and Muslim civil society in relation to the institution of the Waqf, and explore the future prospects of developing Awqaf to reclaim the significant historical role that they played in strengthening and uniting the Ummah. Dr. Khafagy is the author of several publications on the role of Awqaf in civil society organizations in the Muslim world and the West. Her most recent book is entitled Western Civil Society Organizations, Messengers of Value, Domestic and International Roles. She was honored by the Kuwaiti Awqaf General Foundation for her contributions to Awqaf and to her contributions to the study of Waqf. She earned her PhD in political science from Cairo University. And I believe you worked closely with Dr. Nadia Mustafa, who we were honored to have in the last colloquium. So it's wonderful to continue that connection, that intellectual connection in an ummatic spirit as well. She received her MA in political science, again from Cairo University in 2006, her PhD in 2012. And she also received an MA in Islamic Studies and Political Science from the Graduate School of Islamic Social Sciences in Virginia in the United States in the year 2000. You have a very sort of long and distinguished CVs, but I will, in the interest of giving people the opportunity to hear your thoughts, I will invite you to begin your presentation. Please feel free to share your screen. I understand you also have a PowerPoint presentation.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Thank you, Dr. Osama, for this introduction. And I'm very happy to be with you today. Thanks for the generous invitation for lecturing with Ummatics. Actually, I'm happy to be part of to present this lecture because this is one of my main research interests about Waqf, and especially making a kind of comparison between the Waqf in the Islamic civilization and the Western or civil society in the Western context. I would like to share with you my screen, my PowerPoint presentation, focusing on this point. Can you see my screen now?
We can, and if you could make it full screen, then if you start presenting, make it full screen. Jazakallah khair, perfect.
I firstly will start with a kind of theoretical framework, just to make a kind of brief comparison between the two paradigms, the Muslim civil society, not Muslim civil society, Muslim society or Muslim Umma and its role, the societal institutions in the Islamic world in general, and also the other paradigm, which is like modern / Western civilization that it's like currently implemented in the modern Arab and Muslim countries. Then I will give a brief definition of the concept of Waqf and its historical practice before moving to the current or modern context in which there was a kind of colonialization, and then the post-independence states, which is most of the cases they tend to be nation states with the adopting the Western paradigm in dealing with the civil society. I also will will identify the current revival of the Waqf institution in terms of its causes, features, and challenges before moving finally to give some hints about the prospect and the future of this revival. Usually, the term of civil society is somehow it's very common and turned to be widely used in the Islamic context currently, but I believe it has like a different connotation and has a different relevancy. It's more relevant to the Western or / modern civil society, modern civilization. In the case of the Western civilization, we had the state and then the market, and finally the state had to develop the third sector, which is a kind of mediator between the state and the market. So we expect that the civil society or the third sector in this regard will be promoted, created, and of course legitimized and organized by the modern state. It's a kind of outcome of the interaction between the state and the market. Most of the variety of civil society formats or patterns in the Western civilization, it came mainly due to the differences of the power relations between their states and their markets in the local context. We are talking about social democratic countries, we are talking about liberal context, we are talking about, in some cases, even communist or so on. All of them are more relevant to their social origins, which is like embedded in the same paradigm, created by the state, and then promoted and legitimized, moderated by the nation state in this regard. All assigned roles will be outcome of this paradigm, either the provision of the social services, or even, as claimed by Gramsci, the intellectual hegemony. In this case, we have a sort of hierarchy between in which we have the top. On the top, we have the state, and then the third sector or whatever. In the context of the Islamic model or the Islamic paradigm, we have a very different, not hierarchy, we have a very different arrangement from the in the Islamic context. We have the Ummah. We have the Ummah has a collective mission, which is like worshipping Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And this this mission of worshipping should be done by Umran, by building civilization and calling for Islam, and of course fulfilling all of the sufficiency duties, furud al-kifaya, furud al-ain, mandatory duties. All of them should be fulfilled by the Ummah itself. And all societal institutions, including civil society, if you could like to use this term, including the Waqf, including all the syndicates or professional syndicates or worker syndicates or whatever. We have Tawa'if al-Hiraf, we have the ulama, we have the Ahl al-Hal wal-Aqd, we have scholars. All of them will be part of societal institutions. And my argument actually is to add also to them the political authority itself. It's not isolated. The political authority in this case, I argue it's one of the societal institutions. It has, of course, we have a kind of division of tasks or labor in this regard. Like, and by the end of the day, all unfulfilled duties should be accomplished by any capable societal institutions. I studied somehow the history of Andalusia, in which there was a deterioration of the governing political authority. And then during this period of deterioration, the societal institutions at the core of them, the Waqf, the ulama, the societal leaders, they actually led the contribution and led the sustainability and the process of survival of the society itself. So in this case, we are not talking about the state or the political authority as in within a hierarchy in which this authority on the top. But instead of that, we are talking about a collective mission and which should be fulfilled by all societal institutions, including Waqf, including professionals, including ulama, including leaders, including the political authority itself. We have, in this case, the core should be the state, the core should be the Ummah itself instead of considering the state here is the core, which I think it's like the most significant difference between the Islamic paradigm and the Western paradigm. What will be the core in this paradigm? In the Western paradigm, we have the state, which is like nation state, of course, but any political authority will be at the core to legitimize, to organize, to assign tasks or not. In the case of the Islamic paradigm, we have the Ummah itself. This is a source of sovereignty, the source of legitimization, the source of power for all societal institutions. Societal institutions in this regard can exchange their duties based on the balance of power, not based on the balance of power, I mean based on the most powerful institution which will be capable of accomplishing the unfulfilled duties. At the core of the societal institutions, we have Waqf. Waqf, to define Waqf as a concept, it's a sort of institutionalization of running voluntary charity, sadaqat al-jariyah, instead of just donating this charity to be spent immediately. Waqf, it's like institutionalizing this donation to be invested, and all of the revenue will be spent on more sustainable spending venues. Legitimization of Waqf is usually done by Sharia. Waqf has its own legal personality immediately related to the of course, to Sharia itself and its rules, and to the donors' will and wishes. Based on that, we have a kind of Waqf enjoys and the independence due to enjoying the fund, its own fund, its relevancy to Sharia, its relevancy to the donors' will. One of the features and indications of this independency simply that no legal authority can change or replace any of the donors' will, unless this should be accepted or by the donors, of course, or even due to issue the fatwa related to this case specifically. So it's totally independent. It's not. It has never been assigned its tasks owned by the state or by a kind of power relation with the state or with the market, but instead of that, it's mainly related to the donors' as well as, of course, conditional to not being violating the Sharia rules. The case of Waqf also offers us a sort of sustainability. Sustainability here refers to the ability of Waqf to maintain its fund for a long time due to investing its assets and, of course, securing revenue for a long time. So whatever the donors allocate, they will be able to maintain their well and maintain their aims and goals to be achieved for a long time. Some of the I think some of the waqfs in the Islamic world, some of them they might be maintained for about more than 1,000 years. Also, we have the waqf. It's more flexible, which is like different from the case of zakah. Zakah, it has specific spending. It has a specific percentage, but instead of that, in the case of waqf, we have it's affordable for all social classes. Anyone, Rasulullah mentioned that we can donate part of a date, شق تمرة. And of course also some advices for Sayyidina Umar ibn Khattab, Rasul advised him that he can also he might donate 1/3 of his wealth. So between the two, the 1/3 of Sayyidina Umar ibn Khattab's wealth and the half of the date, we have a huge scale of voluntary charity and donations. In terms of spending goals, Waqf is like very creative, which will be explicit also in its historical practice. We have in the historical practice like two huge categories. One of them is like the provision of social services or sufficiency duties, where they have been for a long time, only maintained and offered by Waqf, in some of the cases exclusively by Waqf. Education, healthcare, showing social solidarities with widows or even angry women or whatever, supporting or funding needy people or orphanages. The education in the Muslim world, it has been funded mainly by Waqf, including universities, schools, including not only providing education in this case, but also providing a set of value related to education, including education, women's education, including also supporting what was known in, for example, in the modern ages as modern education, establishing universities in Qayrawan, establishing universities in Egypt. Cairo University itself, it's one of the outcomes of these endowments. This is what is usually known as Waqf in terms of its historical practices, but also one of the I believe it's a kind of creative contribution of Waqf. It's like securing fund for independent societal leaders and scholars. Scholars, including ulama, religious ulama, or specialized in Sharia, or any other scholars, they have been funded, they used to be funded mainly by endowments to guarantee their independence. Not only to guarantee the independence in the front of the political authority, but also to guarantee their independence in the front of students, in the front of all other funding or financial institutions. So in most of these cases, we can say that societal leaders, independent societal leaders and scholars, they were able to pioneer the political, religious, and societal reform in the Muslim Ummah. I believe for myself that Waqf has contributed significantly to the process of reform politically, socially, and even for scholarly in the Muslim Ummah. The title of this lecture refers to, or making a kind of division between civil society or Waqf from one side, and from the other side, the nation state. Nation state was not created. It was not created suddenly in the Muslim Ummah, but instead of that, it was an outcome of the colonialization. During the colonialization era, the Waqf has suffered a lot of restrictions, colonial attempts to confiscate and restrict the laws, the financial resources of Waqf, and even the spending revenues for Waqf. But at the same time, one of the main features of the Waqf that protected its independence and sustainability was its legal independence. As I mentioned earlier, the Waqf, it's like reliable and mainly on the Sharia laws, related mainly to it used to be organized exclusively by the Sharia courts and restricted by the donors well. So this kind of legal independence offered a kind of protection for Waqf during the colonialization. But of course, the colonial authorities' attempts to confiscate or to restrict Waqf, it ended up by significantly weakening the colonialization. The creation of nation state simply, it was a turning point of the Waqf in the Muslim Ummah, because this was the milestone in which the Muslim countries, they started to adopt or to implement the modern or Western paradigm in dealing with the Waqf as one of the civil society organizations. As I mentioned earlier, there was a huge difference between the concept of societal institutions and at the core of them Waqf, and in the Islamic paradigm, and the concept, rights, and definition of the civil society in the modern and Western civilization. Starting from I think mid 1950s, most of the Muslim countries, they turned to be nation states or post-independence states, adopting the modern paradigm, modern Western paradigm in dealing with Waqf as one of the civil society organizations, which the sovereign state in this regard should supervise, should legitimize, should in some of the cases even confiscate its assets, as what happened in Egypt under the Nasser's regime, and later on in other, not later, in 1957 in Tunisia, it was completely banned, and all of the assets were confiscated for the public as public resources. The contradiction between nation state in the Muslim countries and the Waqf and all other societal institutions in the region, it turned to be very clear since the creation of the post-independence state. So, what is the difference between 1950s and currently? Actually, I think there was, during the last maybe 25 years, we have been witnessing a sort of Waqf revival. It has many causes. Maybe it's irrelevant actually directly to the Waqf itself, but instead of that, it's coming out of the local and global context. And of course, this sort of revival, it has its own feature, as I will discuss later. The causes. Waqf revival in this case came as an outcome of like two main causes. One in the Gulf states and the other one in the North African or talking about specifically the Arab countries, North African countries. For the Gulf countries, I think there was since early 90s, there has been a huge inflow money for due to the oil revenues, and especially after 9/11, most of this money it was obligatory or mandatory. It had to be invested and donated, distributed locally and domestically, just to avoid, due to the restrictions which were imposed by the Western governments on any global humanitarian efforts by the Gulf states. So starting from 9/11, we have been witnessing an intensive focus from the Gulf charity to be invested domestically in Gulf countries. Many of them, they established their own endowments, Waqf, and we are talking about billions of riyals, billions of, especially in Saudi Arabia, we are talking of billions of Saudi riyals, and of course, most of this money intensively changed the philanthropic map on domestic philanthropic map. For the North African countries, Egypt, Morocco, and other Algeria, all other similar cases, surprisingly, the nation state here, it has to take a step back. It has to relatively withdraw from the provision, from the field of the provision of social services due to adopting the structural adjustment policies following those countries' financial crises. Most of them couldn't afford to sustain the provision of social services, and instead of that, they preferred to get a sort of help or partners to arrange a sort of partnership with Waqf endowments or any other any similar societal institutions. This revival, it's like under the umbrella of the nation state, it has like main two features. Focusing on internal renovation or reform. The challenge of the Waqf historically, it was not only due to the external pressure by the colonial authorities or even the nation state, but also some of the, partly the Waqf, it was claimed on, it was accused by corruption in some of the cases. So most of the Waqf revival currently is like devoting its effort to a sort of administrative reform, promotion of good governance, seeking innovative investment mechanisms, arranging like much better strategic planning or setting new programs and goals. This is for internal renovation or of Waqf. For the external challenge related to the relationship between Waqf and the nation state, we have been witnessing also a sort of what is known as private-public philanthropy partnerships. This was firstly developed in the United States as a public-private and philanthropic partnerships under, especially under Obama's administration, talking about enhancing the philanthropic contribution or the third sector contributions in the provision of the social services by a sort of organizing a partnership and collaboration between the three sectors: private, public, and charity or philanthropy. This has been significantly appeared in the case of, for example, in the Saudi New Vision 2030, which integrated the non-profit sector for in the strategic goals, emphasizing that this sector should collaborate and should coordinate with the government to enhance its contribution in the GDP. What are the problems in those features or this issue? I think we can see some internal as well external challenges to this to the current revival. Internal challenge related to what extent the adaptation of the criteria of global good governance could be compatible with the Islamic paradigm. The process of accountability and traceability, promoting accountability and transparency, it's like, of course, it should be welcomed by the Waqf administration, but at the same time, the process of adoption of the criteria of accountability, the mechanism of transparency, the definition of good governance, the relevancy of those criteria to the Sharia and compatibility with the Sharia laws and rules should be also questioned and should be enhanced more and reviewed in any process of improving the internal good governance of Waqf. The other challenge, which I think it's maybe the most significant challenge for the Waqf current revival, it's the maintaining of nation state control. The nation state, the current nation state, the current political authority, actually, they would like to have a simple equation using, still dominating exclusively the organization of the public sphere, but at the same time using Waqf as one of the tools or mechanisms to provide social services, which the current nation state can no longer provide exclusively. I think it's not a fair game in this regard. There must be a kind of a balance. There must be a sort of revision of the relationship between the nation state, the political authority, the public authority here, and the philanthropic organizations. There should not be the same level of legal restrictions. There should not be the same, in this case, the Waqf or any other societal organization should not be a recipient only for the state's assigned rules or functions, but instead of that, I believe there must be a kind of long-term plan to expand any allocated rules. Some of the people who are like involved practically in more of the philanthropic activities and Waqf management. We had a discussion earlier, and they told me they cannot avoid the rule of government, which is like still dominating and very controlling. I agree. This is a fact, and we have to deal with it. But also, we have to just to set a long-term plan to expand, to make what I believe it's kind of sunnat al-tadafa. We have to push the government to eliminate its hegemonic legal rule, seeking for more relaxation of legal restrictions. More relaxation of the legal restrictions should be also seeking more compatibility with the Sharia laws, more financial mechanisms to be compatible and consistent with the Sharia, more influence, practicing influence. And I think this is what we might quote what Dr. Osama mentioned at the beginning, the role of philanthropic organizations in the United States. It's a very huge role. And of course, although it's a nation state, the philanthropic organization or the third sector, it enjoys an increasing and very influential role in setting or at least advising the laws, implementing some strategies. My recommendation here is mainly for achieving more Waqf revival or to be more significant, to be more influential. It's like setting long-term plan. What should we do on the short term, middle term, to achieve long-term goals for expanding and recalling again the Islamic paradigm in which the state, the political authorities, is one of the societal institutions. Even we don't have to say that explicitly, but at least we have to practice that by pushing for expansion of the Waqf's contribution, Waqf's influence in the society. Hopefully, I'm not beyond the time.
You're actually just on time. You have another 3-4 minutes if you'd like to add anything else, but otherwise.
Okay, thank you. I think also for to claim all of this or to aim for achieving all of this expanding contributions and influence, we have to pay more attention to the internal renovation, mission-based goals. Again, I wouldn't like to consider Waqf here as a recipient for any or a reactor only for the what's coming on of events or whatever, but instead of that, there must be like long-term mission, setting long-term mission goals, improving the good governance, and of course, if we have all of that without committed qualified cadres, this will not be sufficient. And I believe in this case, it's a kind of improving the role of the Waqf. It's a kind of internal and external mission for the people who are like donating and running the Waqf, as well as for the society itself. Thank you, Dr. Osama. Thank you, Ummatics, for hosting me.
Jazakallah khairan, Dr. Riham Khafagy, for really a fascinating overview of the way in which the Awqaf has have operated historically in our communities within the Ummah as a major institution that, in a sense, is one of the major contributions of this Islamic Ummah to civilization as a project. But also how that has translated into the modern world in the post-colonial context, in the colonial and post-colonial context, into a very challenging space, actually, which I think we're still trying to navigate. And I think this opens up a line of questioning, which I'll explore with you, inshallah, briefly before we open up Q&A. But I do want to remind listeners that we have a great privilege to have Dr. Khafagy with us for the next hour or so. And if you want to ask questions, please feel free to put them in the chat, in the Q&A. We do have some questions coming up, and we're going to try our level best to address as many of them as possible, inshallah, with Riham's kind of kind support. But I wanted to actually start by asking a series of questions of my own, if that's all right, just as maybe a reflection, and then if you want to respond to that, please feel free. So when it comes to the question of Awqaf, I think what we're really dealing with in our own context is a sense that this important, valuable Ummatic institution, historically speaking, has gone into a kind of decline. Some would argue a very significant decline. And you mentioned the Nasser era kind of usurpation, but it goes back to, I think it goes back to the era of Muhammad Ali Pasha. Muhammad Ali Pasha, in a place like Egypt, the modernization of Egypt led to this sense of states that we have the right now. This is the global norm, that states can, basically usurp whatever is going to support raison d'etat, like in terms of the state's own justification is sufficient as a normative grounds to make claims over these institutions. And I think throughout the Muslim world, we've been suffering from that. I think the state remains, I think you've said this or suggested it reasonably explicitly, the state remains the most powerful actor in our societies. These awqaf were historically protected by legal norms. By law, the state actually doesn't have the right to interfere with these awqaf. They are private awqaf that are protected by Islamic legal norms historically. But, in the colonial period, perhaps through fatwa that were used opportunistically by states, they were very often taken over. And I wonder if in our own time, we risk romanticizing our historical sort of legacy of the Waqf in a time when we say awqaf in the modern Muslim world, very often we're talking about ministries that are under the control of the state. And, we're not necessarily saying, even though Ummatics recognizes that the nation state is a major challenge to reinvigorating this notion of Ummatic unity, we're not necessarily saying that the state is always an evil or malicious actor. Yet, when the state will utilize the awqaf, bring it under its own sort of control by creating these ministries, and is able to dictate, and you mentioned, public-private partnerships in the Middle East, in certain countries where the country that you mentioned is one where even the private individuals are not protected from sort of the things being taken in, and we know about the the recent history of that, and the fact that the state might claim even private individuals' wealth. So with that being the case, is there really a future for, or perhaps let me ask it in a more optimistic form, what would be a possible pathway to reinvigorating genuine awqaf that serve the Ummah rather than serve the short-term interests of particular states? And perhaps I can add one other dimension to this, which is I've been looking recently at the news in North America, which has, as I mentioned at the outset, some of the wealthiest educational awqaf in the world. Harvard has the largest educational waqf in the world. And Harvard has been relentlessly attacked in recent weeks in the press because its president made certain statements and was not seen as sufficiently supportive of Jews who feel under attack on campus. And I think in that sort of a context, we're witnessing the sort of pressure that wealthy donors can bring to bear on supposedly independent academic institutions. So even in, countries like the United States, which have very successful awqaf, I think last I checked, Harvard's Waqf value was well over 50 billion, something like this. And even in that context, these aren't completely independent institutions. They have to serve the interests of the powerful. So, is an Islamic model going to provide a significant alternative to that? Sorry, a very broad mix of questions, but I hope that gives some of my reflections. And I really look forward to hearing your reflections on how we can take the Ummah on a journey and make this an Ummatic project that revives Awqaf for the sake of the Ummah, inshallah. Barakallah fiki.
Dr. Osama, should I respond to your question, or will we take some questions and then I will go for them?
Entirely up to you, actually. So I'm happy for if you would like to take some of the questions, but if you would like to first, because I've given you quite a bit potentially, if you want to respond to that before we address the questions, you're more than welcome to. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. I think this is a huge challenge. It's not only for Waqf, it's for any institution or any expression of the connections between the people belonging to the same ummah, to have a project that ummatic project. We are still under the control or within a context, not only a regional context, but also within a global context in which the dominant unit, political and even mostly social even, but dominant exclusive political unit is the nation state. And of course, each nation state, ironically, they might have their different individual interests, but all of them share the same goal together to maintain and to sustain the same state-centric system. Actually, I don't have a specific prediction in this regard, but my only prediction will be relevant to another research that I have done related to the uprising and to the increasing influence of the non-state actors politically and socially in the region, in the Muslim regions and Muslim countries, Muslim Umma, and also in the Arab countries. We have been witnessing an increasing influence of the non-state actors, social non-state actors, political non-state actors, and whatever. In this case, I think in the long term, we might hopefully can see more collaboration between different donors from the same Waqf to organize or to coordinate something related to the Ummah. But so far, under the dominance of the nations the nation states, we can hardly claim that there will be a potential on the short term, at least. What I'm seeking to do, or what I'm hoping to have on the short term, is like a Waqf revival on the domestic level. But beyond that, it's still challenging, actually.
Absolutely, Jazakallah khairan. And I mean, perhaps I can again try and inject a bit of optimism into this. Sometimes, as academics, I feel like we're very good at the analysis, but we're not project builders. We're not entrepreneurs, and we're not leaders of movements typically. And so I think one of the limitations that we have as an ummah is the suffocation of our imaginations by the current sort of realities, which are actually very difficult to deal with in many instances, and places like the Middle East in particular. And I hope that in engaging in these sorts of conversations and re-enlivening the imagination of the Ummah to think ummatically and to recognize the possibilities that exist, that we're going to start to encourage more and more people to actively participate in that thinking process that tries to revive these sorts of institutions in meaningful ways, people like that. So people like yourself and your work is going to be immensely important. And I encourage our viewers and audience to spend the time reading Dr. Riham's work, but also wider work in these arenas, so that we can genuinely start to create that sort of shift in thinking that decenters the nation state as the normative sort of like agent of public life in the global on a global scale. I also want to just quickly say that audience members will be sending you a brief survey to get some feedback on our colloquia. So please keep your eyes open for that. And we want to improve. We want to, serve the community and the Ummah, inshallah, through these. So we would really be grateful for your response to those. With that, let me ask a few of the questions which are coming in, inshallah, directed towards you, Dr. Khafagy. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. This comes from Rabia Brown. How likely is it for the US taxpayer to be able to take advantage of tax policies and provisions like charitable deductions to be able to fund Waqf institutions? This is a very US-centric question, but you have experience in the US. Would this be allowed under Sharia law? If you'd like, I can reread the question if that's helpful.
You mean to get benefit from the tax laws? I think there is no clear contradiction. I have not heard about any fatwas that might contradict between taking an advantage of the tax laws and their Sharia. But actually, I would like to just mention one of my professors. Of course, maybe he's a very well-known scholar about Waqf, Dr. Ibrahim al-Bayoumi Ghanem. Dr. Ibrahim usually recommends that Waqf assets should be dealt or and taxed as regular business, which will actually will be benefiting the society also. And this is one of the motivation for the Waqf administrators to improve their governance. Not that 100% imitation of the business style of governance, but at least this might motivate them to improve. There is no contradiction between using tax laws or tax benefits in this regard, but I, for myself, I'm support my professors' recommendations. It's a business. It should be a business, and it should be dealt also as a business. Taxes, including everything. And the motivation here will not be just exemption from the taxes. The motivation here will be the worship of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and the benefit for the society itself, which is there is no taxes, no need for tax exemption in this regard.
This is a very interesting point that you're highlighting, because it's an area of debate in the United States specifically, which is that right now we have these massive institutions, whether it's Ivy League schools or major universities, and sometimes major foundations of other kinds, which, because of their non-profit status, are completely exempt from taxation. And this means that, and the sad reality is, a lot of these institutions actually ultimately serve the very wealthy, and they are ways for the very wealthy to be able to avoid tax legally, of course, tax avoidance being different from tax evasion. And so, in a sense, it's the operation, and there's a movement. I think it's relatively small scale, but there are people who are campaigning to, as you suggest, begin taxing these sorts of institutions as businesses. And I think it just shows that even in the most powerful state that exists today, exactly how this can become quite problematic, in that a Waqf can ultimately end up serving the social elite, as it does in places like the Ivy League. In the main, it is the social elite that benefit, and it's a way in which the donations very often come from the social elite, and they're happy to give it to institutions like Harvard because they know their own children will be able to go there because of their donations. So these are problems that perhaps, I don't know if you've written about explicitly, but perhaps need to be addressed.
Not specifically about.
So,
but I think
yeah.
this is a kind of not fatwa, but at least there should be a kind of scholarly work, and of course related to that. Considering the economic context in general, not specifically the issue, this issue in relevance between the tax laws and the philanthropy, but also considering the features of the economic system in general.
Mm-hmm. Barakallahu feekum. And I mean, thinking about the economic system in general is a very big arena, which we need more people to be doing that. And I hope, among the audience, as we reflect on these questions, there will be people who will recognize this and perhaps pursue sort of higher studies in these areas. So perhaps I can ask the next question. I realized there were questions which were asked before the one that I did ask, and I apologize that I didn't take this in order. But there are a few questions coming in. One from one individual who's saying, what role can the nation state play in the Ummatic revival of the Waqf system? So this is maybe a somewhat ironic question, but perhaps asking you to think about, well, the nation state, we have it already. It is the most powerful force. Is there any way which that can be, in a sense, reverse engineered to benefit the Muslim Ummah in thinking about reinvigorating Awqaf?
Yeah, I think in some of the cases and some of the countries actually before 9/11, yani to be honest, before 9/11, there was many endowments allocated for global humanitarian relief and developmental activities, which is a sort of practicing awqaf for the sake of the ummah's benefits and interests. And this was under the umbrella of nation states. So maybe if some nation states can reconsider the distribution of their allocated of the waqfs of their waqfs allocated revenues, and so internationally and globally, and instead of only focusing on domestic sphere, this will be a sort of the nation state's contribution for promoting waqf for ummah. The case has been implemented before, of course, before 9/11, and should be repeated again if there is a sort of political will in this regard.
So just as a follow-up to that, I mean, you're suggesting here that we study in international relations that nation states are self-interested entities that are ultimately interested in the national interest, and how that is defined might be differed upon. But I think it sounds valuable to think in terms of, okay, what can the nation state do to help revive this, and it already existed before 9/11. Are there incentive structures that you are familiar with that you would encourage the cultivation of, that we can, present to nation states as, white papers or policy papers for them to consider taking these on? And would this perhaps even be possible in non-Muslim nation states? Because increasingly there are large Muslim minorities. We, for example, in the UK have every major pension organization will have a Sharia compliant sort of portfolio where Muslims will be able to invest. So I wonder if you have any experience of that kind.
I think some of the Saudi, the context is now it's different, but some of the Saudi organization, they used to be like that. They used to be allocated even by the Saudi kings huge endowments, and spent most of the revenues for humanitarian relief globally, development. I think in the case of Africa, many African and Asian countries, they got not, I don't like to call it donation, but this is a kind of support, solidarity, showing solidarity between the Muslim countries. And I believe many of the maybe Kuwaiti cases also in the especially Gulf countries, Gulf states, they are qualified to do that because they don't have urgent domestic need. And also they have huge investments, huge endowments. So redirecting those cases instead of currently focusing on domestic contributions will significantly recall their historical experiences in supporting Ummah and the by Waqf and by in promoting Waqf here in this case, not on the domestic level, not on the local level, but on the Ummatic level.
Right. So we're thinking about the domestic level. We had a colleague, Sidi Yahya Burt, present about a year ago on his report, Ummah at the Margins. He published a report talking about the Muslims living in minority contexts. And if I recall the numbers correctly, about a quarter of the Ummah lives as minorities in non-Muslim majority states. So one of the questioners is asking how are Muslim minority communities faring in the revival of the Waqf system? And I'll just tie in his other question with this, which you've addressed somewhat already, but so feel free if you want to deepen your engagement. Are Waqf institutions or Awqaf in nation states independent in what they may support locally and internationally? And what I would be interested in there, because you mentioned in certain instances they don't have as much independence, but what's the balance of those places where within a nation state there are Awqaf institutions that are able to engage in international aid work of some kinds? To what extent are they ultimately serving the political interests of the nation state? So two questions. One is about minorities and about independence. Sharon.
So let me start with the one about minority. I believe in the case of the Muslim minorities who living especially in the European or the United States, European countries or the United States, they have a great chance to contribute in this regard to promote Awqaf globally. They still have a space for promoting for establishing Waqf, and due to being a minority, there is a kind of protection for their rights in those countries to a sort, as far as I know, actually, to organize the Waqf based on somehow Sharia-friendly laws or Sharia-friendly rules. And in this regard, this, I believe, one of the Islamic relief. It has endowments, and at the same time, it works globally. This is a privilege that it's not exist for most of the Waqf based on the Arab countries, at least. I don't know exactly about the Malaysian or Turkey is also, it's not a minority, a Muslim minority country, but at the same time, it has the privilege of most of the Muslims over there. They can allocate Waqf and donate its revenues internationally. Maybe there are like more restrictions on the Arab region somehow, but other countries, non-Arab, they still have a good chance in this regard. Of course, some considerations and some restrictions still could be imposed, but
I mean, it's very tricky. In certain parts of the world, we know that there might not be quite as much independence as it's not an ideal environment for a Waqf to operate in. To sort of put it somewhat euphemistically, but I think even in minority contexts, we have certain challenges, sometimes very severe ones. So you mentioned Europe and the United States, but of course the largest Muslim minority in any country is in India, and there the problem is acute. It's worse than many Muslim majority countries. I think we are very fortunate in places like Europe and the United States to have broadly speaking, rule of law system, and to be sort of countries where people have certain freedoms, but unfortunately, Muslim minorities in particular, are often very securitized. And so that creates other sorts of problems where, because you are framed within as being potentially a national security threat, or your institutions might be framed as such, then actually the rule of law may not apply to you in that way. And so we have a lot of work to do. I think one of the things to just bear in mind is that people are rewarded for their efforts. And so if they are working within difficult circumstances, that is no reason to give up on making very significant efforts.
Exactly. My major is political science, so I think for politics, for Waqf as politics, you have to be somehow realistic. You have to develop like an imagine, but as at least you have to work under the current pressure and the current rules to expand your opportunities and to expand your influence. But without like working, you will never be able to expand the opportunities or influence. So this is a challenge, actually.
Inshallah,
Um,
absolutely. I mean, in so many respects, the Muslim Ummah has to operationalize new projects in order to make them address the challenges that we face, and perhaps some of the mechanisms through which we will establish Awqaf in the near future, we're not aware of yet because they haven't been tried. I have a relatively detailed question from on economics. So I'm going to read it out, if that's okay. And then inshallah. Incidentally, if people would like to continue asking questions, we do have, inshallah, another 50 or so minutes of Dr. Riham's time. Jazakallah khairan. So in this question, the questioner asks, in economic terms, one of the limitations of Awqaf is that it is arbitrary and left, especially for funding, to the benevolence or not of the individuals or groups with sufficient means. This then leads to the problem of suboptimal outcomes. For example, education. How can a crucial function such as this be left to the arbitrariness or perceived benevolence of particular individuals? In addition, we have the problem of influence of these people. Surely these departments, such as education, I guess government departments like education, have been centrally administered, governed, and funded by the state. So I guess there's a question of how can a Waqf behave optimally if these are ultimately people with their own personal interests driving the way in which investing is undertaken.
I think this is one of the advantage of Waqf to have it like institutionalized, and beside following or submitting the donors well, you still have some other stakeholders to contribute to managing the process of the provision of education or healthcare or whatever. Usually the donors, they just set general goals, very specific goals, or that might contradict not only by the Sharia with the Sharia, but also with the general context. They might be questioned. So here comes the rule of the Sharia court. They practice they used to practice a kind of indirect censorship to the donors' conditions or the wills, to avoid any direct interaction between the donors and the beneficiaries in this regard, to avoid any sensitivity in the provision of social services, and at the same time to avoid any abuse of the beneficiaries' needs from the donors, to avoid using or manipulating the process of Waqf. Other stakeholders will be involved in this process to avoid any corruption.
Right. Barakallahu fikum. I've just realized I don't know if Salah Abdurrahman can potentially make an exception. We're usually taking written questions, but I've seen a hand from Dr. Muhammad Ghazali Muhammad Noor from Malaysia, who is a very respected figure in Awqaf. He worked for a very long time in the Islamic Development Bank in Jeddah, Saudi, and he's raised his hand. I don't actually have the ability to allow you to speak. Oh, Jazakumullah khair. So please, if you would like to add a comment, you've just been added to the panel, Dr. Ghazali. Tafadhal.
Right. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, my dear eminent speaker and the moderator. I take this opportunity to raise a very fundamental question. Is given the historical status of Awqaf, they built the 9 civilizations, and put it aside as against the contemporary challenges of our Ummah, would you not consider to revive Waqf? As my colleague from South Africa, Brother Zainal, mentioned, it should now become the Fardu Kifaya, reversed to be Fardu Ain. Because we know for a fact the administration of Zakat is very predominant in all the Muslim world today. But Waqf have been regulated in the backyard, and therefore we have not seen the economic social empowerment that gave rise to civilizational building by pious Muslims who knew the divine mandate to manage human affairs to this institution. So it's no longer a market imperative, but it's a civilizational imperative to revive back the state as a civilization rather than a state market or political structure of the current political understanding where the state is dominant. I like to see how that can be understood by the Ummah, to take accountability of the affairs as a vicegerent, for them to understand management of this world and next world is a duty obligation of every able Muslim or believer, together with other similar thinking fellow citizens in the countries they stay, whether in the West or the East or Muslim-dominated nation. So I like to see how we can engineer such a transformation of the philosophy of Waqf has a new world order. Because we have the SDGs, we have the new economic order. It is high time the Muslim today also think to provide a different, which is historically embedded in their own civilizational psyche. Thank you. I'm currently the Secretary General of the World Zakat and Waqf Conference. So I'm just building the framework of how our World Zakat and Waqf Conference are being engineered as a modern institution that was established only 10 years ago in contemporary history. Thank you.
Jazakumullah khair, Dr. Ghazali. Inshallah, we will reach out to you and try to get you to speak about this in an future Ummatics Colloquium, bi'idhnillah. But what you're saying is extremely significant and important. In some respects, it's somewhat challenging to create this as a fard ayn, but I understand what you're suggesting, and I would love to hear Dr. Riham's comments as well. As a fard ayn is only an obligation on an individual, it becomes an obligation on every single Muslim who has the capacity to do anything about it. And there's no question that there's a civilizational imperative right now to reinvigorate these sorts of imaginaries, for Muslims to start recognizing that every single individual here, has a role in trying to revive this deeply grounded historical legacy of the Ummah. You mentioned the SDGs, and they've only been developed in recent decades, and they're already a global phenomenon, and everyone is talking about how can we realize them. Well, if we have these sorts of concepts that go back centuries, not just decades, then do we not have a greater duty to try and bring this as a framework for thinking about our global needs as well, inshallah? So
I think I have one comment. Thank you very much for your comment. Mashallah, it's very insightful. But considering this as Fard Ain is like maybe it's a kind of pressure somehow for the people. It's still could be considered as Fard Kifaya. And I think many of the people are currently active in this regard and supporting the scholarly work and in supporting the activity, the administration, and whatever all of this process. But considering this as Fard Ain will be somehow pressuring the people's duties, and especially that we have if we consider the promotion of Waqf and as Fard Ain, we have many other Furud Kifaya to be Fard Ain. So this is a door that will be hard for the people, for other people. So.
I mean, I would just add there that in some respects, the idea of a Fard Kifaya already has the potential to become Fard Ain, يتعين على أشخاص معينة, meaning a person who is in the position to make a contribution in that particular area. If the Ummah is not fulfilling its Fard Kifaya duties, it can become Fard Ain on that individual. So, maybe there's a way of doing Jama' on this mas'ala.
Yeah.
But Jazakumullah khairan again. I'm going to now go back to some of the questions, if that's okay, but again, Jazakumullah khairan, Dr. Ghazali, for sort of jumping in like this. Appreciate your very insightful and important comment, which comes from decades of experience, of course, in the field. So you are more than welcome, inshallah. And so we have a fair few questions, and some of them have already been sort of addressed in some sense. So please feel free to sort of maybe respond to a specific angle. But someone asks, in your opinion, what differentiates Waqf from Western foundations, which sort of justifies the notion that Waqf is a unique model of philanthropy? So what's the difference between sort of these two concepts? So perhaps we can address that before we move on to the next question.
Okay. Yeah. The main difference between Waqf and foundation, we have many differences actually. We might not have differences in terms of the administration and accountability and transparency, because this is the kind of what I consider as technical aspects. But for the goal itself, Waqf is connecting us with the with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It's mainly devoted for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And of course, this will help the society, will benefit the society, but for eventually, it's not eventually, primarily, and eventually, this is for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So this will avoid any conflict of interest, any abuse of the beneficiary's needs that we mentioned a few minutes ago. This is the main goal for Waqf. Also, foundation, it varies actually. We have Christian endowments, we have other religious endowments, we have even Hindu endowments. With all of the other endowments, similar are connected to religions. They are supposed to be connected to for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Foundations are not. Of course, this is a kind of support for the society. This is for the benefit of the community, and of course, but this is not directly related to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And I think this is the huge difference between Waqf or any similar religious institution and foundation. For another difference, and of course, Waqf, it's more compatible with the nations, with the context of the nation state. There is no problem if you only run your endowments locally. There is no need to connect to other abroad communities or countries. This is will be by choice, but there is no commitment to do that. In the case of Waqf, and same for other religious endowments, there is a religious commitment, or at least religious aspiration, to devote these endowments on the scale of the Ummah, Muslim Umma, Judaic Umma, whatever, but at least there is a connection based on spiritual or religious beliefs. Also, for the investment, foundation can accommodate its investment on religious or non-religious mechanisms. But of course, for the Waqf, it should follow friendly or adopt Sharia-friendly rules. I think other than that, there is no difference. But for myself, I believe the connection between Waqf and our desire to worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala by investing in the society, this is a central idea on Waqf, and differentiate Waqf from the foundation.
So, I mean, if I can maybe add to that, those are very significant differences, of course. The idea that an act that we are performing is an act of ibadah, ultimately, right? Mm. Which, shattana ma baynahuma, so to speak, an act which is just an act of charity. And we have the famous hadith of Hatim al-Ta'i, where the Prophet ﷺ was asked about, is Hatim, after all his generosity, going to be of Al-Jannah? And he said he got his reward in this dunya. And he never said, Yawman min al-ayyam, Allahumma ighfirli. And so that is an enormous difference, and Muslims must, keep that in mind. I think the other dimension you mentioned, I find very interesting, because you said that the Waqf is dedicated to the Ummah. Ultimately, normatively, it's dedicated to the Ummah. And those sorts of normative forces are not to be underestimated, perhaps, because, as you say, let's just take the example of the United States. It's got a constitution. It says all men are created equal. What is implied in the constitution is all Americans are created equal. So they can go and sort of engage in murdering and pillaging in other parts of the world, and there is no constitutional redress for anyone. Or it is with great difficulty that redress can be sought. Whereas the Ummah does not the notion of the Waqf as being benefiting specifically, one nation state is not really normal. It might be imposed because a Waqf in a particular nation state is directing it in a certain way, but that pressure, that normative pressure, is, I think, extremely important, and it's something that we can try to utilize and bring that pressure to bear on our various nation states to say, well, actually, don't we want to be part of something bigger? Inshallah. May Allah grant us tawfiq to start those sorts of conversations, and inshallah help this conversation contribute to that, inshallah. In fact, the next question kind of has an element of this, but someone asks, how did, actually no, this is slightly unrelated. So how have Awqaf responded, or how did they respond? It says how can and how did they respond to the issue of mass production? So I guess the emergence of capitalism as a mode of production, and especially considering environmental challenges and globalized economics. So this, I don't know if it's very much a Waqf question, but I don't know if you want to try and address this, because it's talking about two elements. One is the rise of certain forms of production, certain modes of production, and the other is current contemporary environmental challenges in the Anthropocene and globalized economics. Does the Waqf have anything to comment on those issues?
For the mass production, I don't know exactly the response to Waqf's response in this regard, but in general, for any, because Waqf is for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, so it should be consistent with all values, normative values that pleases Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Please Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We cannot violate we cannot abuse environment. We cannot exploit workers. And of course, maybe there is a kind of violations, but in general, this is the model for Waqf. It's very this is exactly, it's a kind of social responsibility. In this regard, any investment will be outcome of the Waqf, or be a sort of investment of the Waqf's asset, should follow the Sharia rules, not only in the administration, but also in the process of production itself, the process of considering the people, distributing the revenues. It's a value set. It's a holistic and comprehensive value set. No violation for environment, no abuse for resources. It could be added to one of the differences between foundation and Waqf.
So can I contest this slightly? And please, I'm maybe not the informed, so please feel free to correct me. But we had COP28 very recently. And one of the challenges that we faced was it was being hosted by a fossil fuel nation, right? And this is a major problem with many of our states, that, we are in parts of the Arab world, but beyond as well, producing a source of energy and a source of revenue, which has been extremely important for development in the modern period. But at the same time, we've come to realize creates a great deal of harm to our environments and has the potential to destroy the planet for future generations. In that sort of context, can we really say that, considering many of these Gulf countries use those revenues to support their awqaf, that we have managed to realize, any of these ethical values or not any of these ethical values, but in this particular instance, are we being able to realize this?
Yeah, I think so. I think this will promote all of the, not only about the environment, but also about any relevant challenges that we are currently facing due to globalization, or including climate change and whatever. This might be, because this is, as I have just mentioned, it's a kind of value set. As long as you are, for example, if you are a good Muslim, you will not be a good Muslim only at home. You will be a good Muslim at school, at university, at your business. Same. If you have a societal institution which is like compatible or adopting the Islamic ethics, it should be society good in terms of its transparency, activities, programs, administration, and also the social responsibility.
I've just realized, and people have been sending a lot of questions on the chat, and I mean, I realize we have probably more questions than we can answer in the remaining half hour. But I hope it's okay to maybe bombard you with quite a few questions at this point in time. And we'll do our best to answer as many of these as possible. I also wanted to say, some of the people were thanking you. Rabia Brown is saying Jazakallah khairan to Dr. Khafagy and Ummatics for an excellent seminar and presentation, and we really appreciate your participation as the audience in this context as well. So another question asks, is there any research that appraises historical awqaf that are no longer around or no longer exist? And what caused their depreciation or demise? This would be useful information for people establishing awqaf to help build longevity. And I think you started off talking about some of this, but perhaps briefly talking about the way in which awqaf went into decline for the purpose of thinking about, how to prevent that in future.
Do you mean to decline due to internal issues in awqaf itself, in the administration itself, or in terms of the context?
The question is just saying that, is there any research that appraises the reasons why certain historical awqaf are no longer around? So I'm happy for you to take it in whichever direction you like as a question.
I think that many research, I don't have in mind a specific name currently, and many research addressed the issue that the corruption in Waqf and the lack of governance. Some of them were published by even, and some proposals also for renovation and reform were published by, as far as I know, Dr. Hisham Daftardar. Dr. Hisham is a significant and well-known consultant for Waqf and finance. But the problems in the historical Waqf cannot be and can hardly be connected to the process of establishing a new and modern one, because we have different setting, we have different economic systems, and we have different investment tools. So it's only getting some guidelines from the significant problems or issues, but still we have to accommodate the process of establishing a new modern Waqf with the current context, current economic and financial social context. Generally, I believe that if you're talking about administration specifically, my recommendation is like being introduced more to the best practices, global best practices, especially in administration. They are very helpful. And of course, there might be a kind of accommodation for them into the local context or into the Sharia-friendly rules. But in general, the general framework, the general administrative framework of most of the global foundations, it will be very helpful for establishing a modern Waqf.
Another question, I'm going to tie in an additional component to this, but someone's asking a very straightforward question. What is the role that the OIC, or the Organization of Islamic Cooperation, playing? What sort of role does it play in terms of the establishment of Ummatic Waqf projects, if any? And I would add to that, we're talking about obviously foundations, institutions. That's ultimately, the Waqf is an institution. But is there a role to be played by individual Muslims? What could an individual Muslim contribute to a Waqf? And one thing I'll add to this, specifically in a Western context, people are very often obligated to contribute to a pension scheme, for example. And this is a major source of funds for institutional investors. They draw on pension schemes. And I wonder if there is any way in which Awqaf can be contributed to through these sorts of mechanisms, because it is a social welfare concern as well with respect to. So I'm sorry, I've mixed in quite a few questions there. Please feel free to choose from them, but the main question that the attendee asked was the OIC's role in Awqaf, if any.
Okay, for the OIC, I think I don't have any information about if they have proposed or they have already established any Waqf for Ummah. But I think their main contribution, which is like especially for the scholarly work about on Waqf and endowments, they assigned this file, endowments and Waqf renovation and renewal for the Kuwait in 1990s, early 90s, and which is like ended by the establishment of the public General Kuwaiti Awqaf Foundation, الأمانة العامة للأوقاف in Kuwait. For myself, I have been dealing with them for maybe 15 years. They have contributed to the fatwa, to the application, collecting more information regularly, and all of the information about endowments, not only in the Arab world, but also in all of the Muslim countries, they are available for free. They have a regular publication, Waqf journal, Awqaf journal, addressing most of the recent and modern issues related to Waqf, published in English, Arabic, and French. This kind of contribution including, of course, the revision of fatwa about Waqf. This is the kind of contribution that it was done by the Kuwaiti Awqaf Foundation, but also this is due to assigning this file for Kuwait by the Organization of Islamic Countries. I think this is the only contribution of the organization. Other than that, I don't know.
I mean, I can only imagine, because the OIC also has a financial arm in the form of the Islamic Development Bank, and I think that tries to do a lot of work. And the bank also develops an has a Waqf. But I suspect the scale on which an institution like that operates is going to be very small compared to something like the World Bank, for example. And so this is another dimension that you've already suggested. In our own time, the institutions have transformed so significantly that we need to remodel our institutions to make them fit for purpose for the modern context as well. A brother, Zayed Khafagy, who I think is the head of a Waqf Academy in South Africa, has noted in the chat, for anyone who's interested, the website of his Waqf Academy. And it offers, as he says, hundreds of articles online and a short course that's free of charge. So this is Jazakumullah khairan for sharing that, Brother Zain al-Abidin. That's actually, these are resources which, the Ummah should try and utilize. And that kind of raising awareness, the benefits of, the global ummatic sort of sensibility means that we can take benefit from any part of the world, inshallah, in that way. I still have many questions here, and I'm a bit concerned we probably won't be able to get to all of them, but Allahumma salli ala Sayyidina Muhammad. I have a question from someone who's saying, in a neoliberal economic system dictating with the neoliberal economic system dictating economic activities, where the market is king, in a sense, it dictates. How can we ensure that awqaf are protected from market pressures that can very often pressure governments to behave in certain ways to direct awqaf revenues to the market or for maybe a corporate agenda? I'm not entirely sure what the implications of that question are, but does the neoliberal economic system create distinct challenges for the Waqf as a project, in your view?
No, I think this, I can see in the new liberal economic system, it's a kind of opportunity for Waqf. It's not that bad for Waqf, because it depends on the individual's contributions and push this system, push the state to a little bit withdrawal from the everyday business. So this is a space that Waqf and all relevant investment can take an opportunity from it to expand its influence, to promote its role in the society. It's not that bad, because I'm not expert in economics. I don't know exactly how can we do that, but in general, I believe this is an opportunity for the Waqf to take further steps in enhancing its role in the society.
I mean, I would perhaps ask in this context, in the humanities and the social sciences in the last few decades, neoliberalism has basically become a dirty word because of the way in which it's often seen, and in view of many scholars, not terribly unjustly, as being a source of exploiting the global south to benefit the global north, for example. So the siphoning off through outflows of foreign investment and destroying sort of economies at very short notice if necessary. And I wonder whether we need to have a more sort of reflective discourse within our communities. I'm thinking of the work of scholars like Jason Hickel, David Harvey, the great geographer in New York, who have been extremely scathing of that tradition of economic thought. At the same time, I quite agree with you that these are the major engines of contemporary economic activity, and they produce vast amounts of money, which could be directed in positive ways as well. So I wonder if there is a more sort of critical discourse on neoliberalism within an Islamic register. I feel like we don't actually have one at the moment. I don't know if you want to comment on that. Oh,
I don't know actually.
That's perfectly fine. It's just a comment in that case on my part. And I personally think that scholars like Jason Hickel or David Harvey, who are people like who are anthropologists or economically oriented anthropologists and geographers and people in other fields, very often I think make important observations in these fields, which are ignored by economists. And I think economics can be a very ideological subject in various respects, but Muslims, as far as I can tell, have not developed a sophisticated sort of discourse in engaging those more critical aspects. So we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for tawfiq.
Well, just a short comment. I think we still lack a waqf devoted for the Ummah as a whole because of political division and so on. But we can still work for setting a plan for this regard. Investigating and examining all of the economic, political, social context and domestic as well as global context to set short-term goals, long-term plan, strategies. It's like this will not be interrupted or might not be interrupted actually due to by the nation state. So still we have a chance to set the goals and to achieve it like step by step.
If I may, I would add further to that. It's not just we have an opportunity, we have an obligation to really sort of think about what it will take to create that sort of an ummatic waqf. As I say, I'm going to refer again to the Islamic Development Bank. In the interest of full disclosure, my father worked there for nearly 20 years. And that's why perhaps I have but it's the sort of financial arm of the Organization of Islamic Cooperation. And the OIC is a far from perfect body, and our institutions are far from perfect, but these are a stepping stone that if we are able to somehow bring into the Muslim imaginary on a global scale, that we are actually one ummah, and that should ultimately override the various divisions that we have and which constantly are re-entrenched because of so much suspicion, unfortunately, of, unfortunately, Muslims for each other. Very often our rulers are suspicious of each other and they're concerned about their own sort of,
sorry,
power.
I have only also one comment again, sorry. But actually, I'll be back to the first sentence that you mentioned about do we romanticize the Islamic history?
Right.
Even during the Islamic history, throughout the Islamic history, most of the waqf, they used to be local and domestic, with the exception maybe of Awqaf al-Haramain. It's like domestic waqf, like serves domestic, used to serve the domestic community. Of course, we are globalized now and we have connections, but by the end of the day, we have local communities. Just forget about the nation state. We have local communities, and we cannot. It might be hard to establish a waqf for the whole ummah, but we can still be more practical. Also, forget about the nation state, but we can be more practical and return back to the Islamic history, localizing most of the waqf. The challenge is how to, or to what extent we can activate and promote the waqf locally to be connected also globally. This is, I believe, it's like more realistic in this regard.
Jazakallah khairan. That's actually a very important corrective, because we're talking about these global sort of ummatic ideas. Historically, we just didn't have the technology to be so interconnected as we are today. And so it is actually, in some respects, quite obvious that historically most of the awqaf would have had to be local. And the Ummah was highly decentralized historically. Most states were highly decentralized because the state did not have the technological or bureaucratic ability to sort of have the level of mastery of its domain as it has today. So in that regard, Jazakallah khairan, that's actually an important corrective. But at the same time, what you're suggesting is, even though the awqaf were local, the imaginary was ummah-wide. The entire ummah shared a vision about how the awqaf is supposed to operate, and that's one thing we want to revive. I'm conscious of time. We have maybe about 10 minutes to go, and there's actually a question specifically about globalization, which I'm tempted to choose, partly because it plays to my own prejudices a little, my comments earlier about neoliberalism. But someone asks, globalization already makes the local global. It is underpinned by normative values of privatization, financialization, and privileging profit. I think this is the neoliberal critique, of course. Waqf is counter-hegemonic. Waqf has a counter-hegemonic logic that seeks to train the subject to see herself differently from the neoliberal financial capitalism, and the desire. I think it's slightly miswritten here. Desire different, and therefore the desire is different, and therefore observed behaviors are different from those that are organic to a neoliberal agency. It's a very poignant reflection. It's not really a question. It's a comment. And I think, it comes from someone by the name Ridwan Krayenstein. I'm not entirely, I hope I didn't mispronounce your name too much. But Jazakumullah khair, that's an important distinction, I think, between like the values of neoliberal capitalism and the values of the Waqf. But I think it needs further articulation, inshallah. Another person adds another comment. If you'll permit me, I'll just mention this comment as well. Developing individual and communal capacities seems to be a common thread across what both scholars are saying. I appreciate how the Sharia court's involvement specifically and the Waqf management process generally is so localized. So this is actually adding to the comment you just made. And the Sharia court is, of course, the Qadi is technically appointed by the Khalifa or his representative, but they have remarkable amounts of discretion to be guided by the norms of the Sharia. And so again, addressing local concerns and local needs is just so sort of central to the way in which the Sharia was operationalized in a way that is quite antithetical to the centralization of the nation state in our own time. But I also think, and perhaps please feel free to sort of comment on this if you think this is worthy of comment, that the technological and bureaucratic transformations that create this centralization are entrenched now, and it's very difficult to see how they can be disembedded, if that makes sense. So I think we need to rethink about, we need to come to terms to a certain extent with these sort of transformations and think, how can we maintain Islamic ethical imperatives in that context? Inshallah.
Yeah, we can consider the globalization, but still will be the most significant portion will be for the local context.
Okay.
As I believe in.
Okay, mashallah. So another person asks a question saying, Assalamu alaikum, jazakumullah khairan for this informative event. The main reason why nation states seek complete control over all aspects of society is because they are afraid of certain aspects of society that may threaten their rule and authority. Do you think that that proposing Waqf mechanisms that guarantee the political authority of nation states could be helpful in establishing traditional Islamic awqaf? This is an interesting question. Like, should we reinforce the nation state's power while sort of like not challenge it in the process of developing a traditional Islamic waqf? At least that's how I read it as a question.
Should we reinforce?
So do you think that proposing Waqf mechanisms that guarantee political authority of nation states could be helpful in establishing a traditional Islamic waqf?
Yeah, it could be. Of course, the as I mentioned, in some cases, for example, previously in Saudi Arabia, in many, maybe in Malaysia, Indonesia, some Turkey in some cases, but to a certain extent, this will be somehow by negotiation, because to a certain extent, if the political authority, the nation state is by default would like to maintain its hegemonic rule, its hegemonic political rule. If there is any challenge, if there is any not violation of its rule, but at least if there is any kind of even a bit of competition, this will be very serious for the nation state. So instead of getting support exclusively from the nation state or challenging the nation state, it's much better to negotiate the spaces to maximize the opportunities, to maximize, to enhance the influence, to have a substantial voice in the not politics, but at least the social context in general. And I prefer that Waqf or any other societal institution not to be too much relying on the nation state. It's much better to be not equal. Of course, it will not be equal to the nation state's power, but at least to be to push the nation state. Sunnat al-Tadafa again.
SubhanAllah. I mean, I think that's a very valuable sort of point for us to bear in mind, in the sense of being pragmatic in a way that serves the Ummah ultimately. And recognizing, as you say, Sunnat al-Tadafa, there will be different pressures, there will be cross pressures in these societies, and those will probably persist always. And we don't need to take one side and then if that side loses and then the Waqf project is finished, that's not either. There needs to be the persistence of that dimension of the Islamic civilization, regardless of circumstance. I'm very conscious of time. We do have, people are saying, giving their thanks. They're doing dua for you. Jazakumullah khairan for really offering your time. And I want to remind people that please do keep your eyes open for an email from Ummatics that will ask you for your feedback on how we can improve this series. We have a handful of other questions. If it's okay with you, I'll ask them in the next 6
months. Okay. No, it's okay.
Wonderful.
You can ask.
So one question is fairly straightforward. Is saying, is there a conflict between civil society and the nation state in Muslim countries? A very general question. I don't know. You can take it in any direction you like. But civil society versus nation state, is that a point of conflict? And it's not asking explicitly about how it relates to Waqf, but Waqf is, ideally part of a broader civil society project. It's a civil society institution. How do you see that relationship?
It's like kind of confusing terms. So civil society as an abstract term, it's fine to consider Waqf as a civil society organization or whatever. But returning back to the roots and foundations of the civil society as a concept and definition, this will end us with a contradiction between the rule of Waqf and its significance in the Islamic paradigm, and the role of the civil society and its significance and functions. So we can call Waqf as civil society, but it doesn't mean they have a compatibility. There is a compatibility between the civil society organizations and the civil and Waqf functions. They are different. Again, my political background just guides me in this regard to set the concept clearly before moving to use it. Waqf is different in this case than the civil society.
I guess, the question also asked about how that relates to the nation state. I don't know if you want to comment on that.
Yeah, and it's the nation state, civil society, as a concept, is very relevant to the nation state. Nation state created the civil society to be like a buffer zone between the or a complementary organizations, between state, market, and the public in general. But as I mentioned earlier, in my theoretical framework, the case is different in the Islamic paradigm. We have all the societal institutions, they have the same mission, and they serve the same goal. So they no superiority, no hierarchy. There is a division of labor. Of course, this exists, and but in the case of the civil society, there is a hierarchy, and on the top of this hierarchy, the nation state, which like sets all of the rules, assigns the tasks and functions. I hope this is a little bit clear.
We have very little time, so I'm going to see if I can ask this perhaps as the last question. But someone, anonymous attendee, is saying part of the claimed role of democratic nations in regards to charity and social services is that they have public trusts to manage those expenditures. How would this role be covered by a Waqf compared to a sort of modern nation state?
Public trusts.
Right. So are public trusts different from Awqaf that basically provide social services? I don't know if
no, it's like it's a different public trust in this regard will be owned by the state itself or by a relevant institution, a public institution, which is like doesn't have a specific donor, and of course it's maybe there is a kind of overlapping between the functions in terms of provision of social services, but
the person is clarifying that he's talking about trust as in the concept of the public's.
Oh yeah.
There was a missing apostrophe there. The public's trust to manage expenditure. So government, requires the public's trust in a democratic society in order for it to maintain legitimacy in managing the financial affairs of society. How do we maintain the public's trust in how Awqaf are run?
In terms of the context itself, the public trust in for the.
I guess, in the sense of the public has to trust those who are managing the Awqaf and disbursing the funds and deciding where the monies will go. Is that something? How do we manage that as a community? You've mentioned earlier that Awqaf need to be localized. Is it basically so organic that communities locally are going through a democratic process to decide those sorts of questions?
No, it's not only about that. It's about it's also to avoid any corruption. There are even historically, the Awqaf used to have specific criteria for selecting the administrators, for supervising them, for regularly monitoring their tasks and evaluating them. And even in the Waqf establishment, the documents for establishing a Waqf, the donors, they used to assign the most qualified of person from their dynasties. There is a supervision, monitoring, measurements by the Sharia court. It's not only the public trust to be an abstract up in the air.
Right.
Usually measurements taken to guarantee and to follow up with the administration, the Waqf administration, to guarantee the rights of the beneficiaries in this regard. It's not only about money itself, it's about the rights of beneficiaries, because this will be their rights.
Right. And this is, in contemporary sort of charitable institutions, we have auditing systems,
exactly.
Reports. The same sort of mechanisms, of course, must have existed in our history, and the public reputation of those who manage the Waqf is probably important as well. That today would be very important for those who are running charities. So we've really had a very broad sweep of this subject, and we really appreciate Dr. Riham for just the 2 hours that you've given of your time and really enlightened us. A lot of people in the chat are sharing their thanks, saying Jazakumullah khairan. They've really thought-provoking presentations. And we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to reward you for your time. And we ask everyone to do dua for you, but also do dua for the Ummah to revive this as an area of research and an area of practice, bi'idhnillah ta'ala. And I also wanted to extend thanks to all of the attendees, also some very senior experts from the field of Waqf tuning in and joining, participating in the conversation through questions and comments. But with that, I would like to conclude, inshallah. And as well as thanking you all, I say subhanakallahumma bihamdik, nashhadu an la ilaha illa anta, nastaghfiruka wa natubu ilayk. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Thank you. Assalamu alaikum.